Good evening, everyone. This week's parsha is Bamidbar, Tavshin Pei Beis, and it's also Erev Shavuos, the day before Shavuos. We have Shabbos, and then Sunday, Monday is Shavuos. And therefore, I would like to share with you a thought that relates both to Parshas Bamidbar and to Shavuos. The first pasuk in this week's parsha, the first verse, chapter 1, verse 1 reads, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert, Bo'el Moed, in the tent of meeting, referring to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, Be'echad al-Chodesh Hasheni, on the first day of the second month, Hashana Hashenis, in the second year, let's say some Eretz Mitzrayim Lamar, to their going out from Egypt, saying. So the Medrash is bothered by the fact that the Torah tells us that Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert. Why was that important to know? And therefore, the Medrash tells us that really at this point, the Torah is alluding not to the God speaking to Moshe at this point, but actually going back to the giving of the Torah. And that the Medrash says, Lamar Bamidbar Sinai. Why does the Torah mention the Sinai desert? Mikan Shano Chachamim. It is from here that the sages taught us. B'shloisha devarim nitna haTorah. The Torah was given with three things. Ba'esh u'vamayim b'midbar, with fire, with water, and in the desert. Ba'esh minayin, how do we know the Torah was given with fire? Because the Torah states in Shemos Yutes Yudches, chapter 19, verse 18, Parashas Yisrael, when the Torah is discussing the giving of the Torah. V'har Sinai Ashan Kulai, Mount Sinai was full of smoke and engulfed with fire. So the Torah was given with fire. W'mayim anayin, how do we know it was given with water? Shnei, as the pasuk states, Gam shamayim natfu, gam avim natfu mayim. The heavens and the clouds dripped water. That's referring to the fact that there was rain present at the time the Torah was given. Uvamidbar v'nayin, and how do we know the Torah was given in the desert? Because this week's parsha begins by Dabar Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai. God spoke to Moshe on the Sinai desert, which means that we're saying here that the Torah's mentioning of Mount Sinai is to allude back to the giving of the Torah when Hashem spoke to Moshe, and that it was done in the desert for a specific reason, because the Torah was given with. It's mentioning what was going on when the Torah was given, and to stress the fact the Torah was given in the desert. The Torah was given with three things: with water, with fire, and in the desert. The Medrash continues. Why was the Torah given with these three things? The same way these three things are free to all those who are in the world. The words of Torah also for free. As it states, all those who are thirsty for Torah knowledge, go to the water. Okay, so the commentary of Eitz Yosef explains that when it says that these three things are for free, it means that water is all over. You can find water for free all over. Fire is also something that's no big deal to be able to find and to make a fire. And the desert is a place that's abandoned. There's nobody living there. There's no growth there. And therefore, the desert is just open and free for anyone to go into. So the common denominator between these three things is the fact that they are for free, to teach us the Torah is for free. The Torah was given with these three elements to teach us that just as these three elements are for free, so to the Torah is for free, meaning the Torah is available. The same way these three things are available, anybody can come and take. The Torah is open, free, ready for everyone to come and take. Now, the commentaries point out that, it's true we have a common denominator between these three things, that they're all for free. But why did the Torah need to be given with these three things? If it's about being free, it would seem one element should be enough. And therefore, there's more alluded to, there's more to be learned from the fact that the Torah was given with water, fire, and in a desert, other than the fact they are for free. And the commentary of Eitz Yosef, commentary on the Medrash, says that the point is to bring out that fire, which is something that doesn't have substance to it, it doesn't have substance to it. That represents something abstract, which is that when one tries to understand Torah, they have to be able to use their intelligence to understand and grasp some abstract concepts. Torah has a certain depth to it, and for that depth, you need to be able to perceive and to understand certain abstract concepts, certain abstract thoughts. And that's what fire, that doesn't have substance, teaches us. Water is about the fact that water is something that flows quickly, which means a person should have enthusiasm. And the desert is about the fact that the desert is a place of solitude, a place where a person can actually be alone, and in order for a person to study Torah properly and to fulfill it, there's sometimes a person can't always be together with other people. A person has to sometimes be away from other people. A person has to sometimes be ready to do things that other people aren't ready to do. And therefore, that's the message of the desert. There are other explanations given about what the desert alludes to. And I'll share another thought. It comes from the Shem Shmuel. The Shem Shmuel says that these three elements the Torah was given in comes to bring out three things. Again, that fire is something that represents burning. It represents enthusiasm. Water actually represents, a little bit different than we said before, it represents actually a cooling off, a calming down, which means that a person has to be able to develop a clarity of thought and a peace of mind to be able to study Torah properly. And the desert, which is again is a barren place, a desolate place, represents the idea of abandoning too much of leaving go of physical material pleasures, because that takes a person away from studying Torah and for doing mitzvahs and becoming to God. A person, of course, has to partake of physical pleasures, material pleasures that are necessary for a person. But the Midbar, which again, a desolate place, represents the willingness and the commitment to give up on material pleasures and physical pleasures for the purposes of studying and fulfilling the Torah. So again, according to the Shem Shmuel, fire is about enthusiasm, a burning desire. Water is about cooling down and calming down, that a person should have peace of mind and a clear thinking. And the desert is about being ready to give up on physical pleasures. Reb Meir Shapiro of Lublin gave another explanation as to what lies in these three elements. And he says that the water and the fire in the desert are all coming to bring out the point that the Jewish people accepting the Torah must be on the condition that at all times and in all conditions, no matter how difficult it may be, the Torah will be kept. And that is whether it's on an individual basis, whether it's on a communal basis, or whether it is short-term or long-term. And actually, he says that if we look at there are certain instances in Jewish history in the Torah that we find these three examples, where you have people that are ready to give up whatever it takes to be able to fulfill the Torah, and will be moser nefesh, go through the self-sacrifice of studying Torah and keeping Torah, even when it's very difficult and even over a long period of time of difficulty. So when it comes on an individual basis, who do we know as an individual that on his own, just standing on his own, without anybody else around him to support him, who was ready to give up his life for Hashem? That was Abraham. He was ready to jump into the burning furnace. When Nimrod told him, either you're in the furnace or you have to worship idols, he jumped into the Kibbush Aish. He was ready to go. He went into the burning furnace and he survived. That was an example of an individual being ready to do whatever it takes to be dedicated and committed to Hashem. We have another example of this kind of Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice under all circumstances to serve God, by the splitting of the Red Sea. There was a man, Hashem told Moshe, the Jewish people, just to go into the water. So a man named Nachshon ben Aminadav was the first one to jump into the water. Others, the rest of the Jewish people, followed after him. And it was that, and they went into the water until they're almost drowning, and then Hashem split their water for them. They showed their dedication as a community, as a tzibur, to be ready to give up everything to serve in the service of Hashem. And the third example of the desert is interesting because, I think we think that with all the miracles the Jewish people had in the desert for 40 years, it was like a walk in a garden, but it wasn't. Yes, they clearly had miracles that were helping them, but it was difficult living in a desert, which was a 40-year difficult situation. For 40 years, they went to the desert. And although they had their sins during that period of time, at the same time, there were very long periods of time that they didn't complain and that they served Hashem. So that's an example of being dedicated to Hashem under difficult circumstances for a lengthy period of time. And that's the desert. So the fire and the water and the desert are all meant to remind us of situations of Mesiras Nefesh, situations of self-sacrifice for the service of Hashem that we see took place with fire, water, and the desert, which represents, the fire represents Avram Avinu, how an individual has to be ready to sacrifice everything for the service of Hashem, which can be as far as Avraham is ready to give up his life, or just to be able to be individually dedicated and loyal to Hashem under all circumstances, as difficult as they may be. That's what fire represents. Mayim represents the Jewish people, Nachshon ben Aminadav, leading the Jewish people to jump into the water before it split. That was where, again, Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, actually ready to give up their lives. They almost drowned in a communal sense. That's what water represents. And the desert represents the Jewish people living in the desert for 40 years, where under difficult circumstances, they remained committed and loyal to Hashem over a lengthy period of time. And that's what is being taught. The Torah is going through these elements, that under all circumstances, for individuals, for people, short time, long time, a person needs to be dedicated to the Torah under all circumstances. That's why Hashem spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai. It gave the Torah to Moshe with these three things. Now, when we talk about individuals being ready to really be committed and sacrifice so much in the service of Hashem, I want to share with you a couple of interesting examples, a couple of interesting stories. And it's interesting because they all involve people in the military. We actually just had Memorial Day this week. And there's some fabulous stories about Jewish soldiers and their commitment to remain committed to the Torah under all circumstances. So this story comes from a book called Something to Say by Rabbi David Goldwasser. And he records the following story. Rabbi Shua of Belz once stayed at a hotel in Vienna for Shabbos. The Rebbe was in the midst of conducting his tish with his followers, when everyone is gathering around with him, when he paused to listen to melodious sounds that emanated from an adjacent room. The Rebbe walked to the door with the Hasidim following close behind. The Rebbe gets up and goes, everybody follows. They saw a young soldier sitting at a table, delving into a sefer, into a book of Torah, with great concentration. The soldier was completely oblivious to all goings on at the hotel. The Rebbe waited at the door. Finally, the soldier realized that the Rebbe was standing there and rushed to greet him. The Rebbe asked the soldier his name and the circumstances that brought him to the. The soldier explained that he had been drafted into the army. He had made only one request of Hashem before entering the army, that he would not have to desecrate the Holy Shabbos. He went on to say that he had been blessed. He was appointed special assistant to an officer, and he pleaded with that officer for permission not to work on Shabbos. The officer agreed on the condition that the soldier work diligently and loyally the remaining 6 days. The soldier concluded his words by saying, I vowed that if Hashem would allow me to every Shabbos, then I would dedicate every moment of Shabbos to the service of God and Torah learning. As the Rebbe was leaving, he turned to his Hasidim and said, who knows if the Torah of this soldier is not postponing the coming of Mashiach? The Hasidim begged for an explanation. What did the Rebbe mean by that? The Rebbe explained, it is possible that the Torah of this soldier is more important before God than the sacrifices and the service in the future Beis HaMikdash, in the future Holy Temple. For a soldier, again, in those years back, in Europe, wherever it may have been, Poland, Russia, to be able to do this and to remain loyal, that every Shabbos he devotes to the service of Hashem and Torah learning, that is so precious, the Belzer Rebbe said, that it may be more precious than the sacrifices of the future Beis HaMikdash that we all wait for. That's one story of an individual and dedication and self-sacrifice. Here's another. There's a story with the Chassidic Rebbe Yechezkel Shinover from Shinover, that his grandson was drafted into the army, Polish, Russian, wherever it may be. And his son came to tell Rebbe Yechezkel that he came crying and broken that his son had been drafted into the army, and that his father, the Rebbe, should daven on behalf of his son that he should be freed from conscription. So the Rebbe Yechezkel said to him, my son, there was a time that I spent with the great and righteous Rameir Parmeshlan. One night he invited me to eat dinner with him. And as we sat together until late in the night, his assistant came and said that there's a Jewish soldier passing through the city with other soldiers, and he wants to come into the Rebbe to receive a blessing. And Reb Meir Parmeshlan entered, told him, bring him in right away. After Reb Meir Parmeshlan asked the soldier what he does, what he needs, he gave him a warm blessing. When the soldier left, Reb Parmeshlan said to me, Rebbe Yechezkel Shinover said, know that Mashiach will come, not in my merit and not in your merit, and not in the merit of anyone like us, but in the merit of Jewish soldiers. Now, both these great men were great men. Was that soldier as great and pious as they were? No. But it was something that he had that they didn't have. The kind of self-sacrifice, dedication, and commitment to being a Jew under these difficult circumstances that we probably have no idea about in the Russian or Polish army. He has that over everyone else. They have that over everyone else. What they have to go through in the army to remain Jews, what they have to go through in the army being Jews, that, Rebbe Yechezkel Shinover said, that is what's going to bring Mashiach. And therefore, the fact that his grandson was drafted, he was accepting it, apparently. But the point of the story is the same idea. The same idea look at an individual's commitment under such difficult circumstances. And the third example I want to share with you, lest you think these examples only happened 100 years ago in Europe before, or 100 years ago, 200 years ago, back in Europe before the war. These stories only happened then. So I received an email from a group that supports Jewish veterans. I don't know why I'm on the email list, but I got it. And they had pictures of Jewish soldiers from World War II, from the Vietnam War, from the Korean War. And then they had this picture of a tombstone. I don't know if you can read it, but it reads like this. This is what the person had on his tombstone. I served in the U.S. Marine Corps, World War II as a staff sergeant. I managed to put on tefillin every day, even during combat in the Pacific, and refrained from eating meat the entire time. The Almighty helped me to survive. That's World War II veteran. And this is what he wanted on his stone. This is what he wanted to be remembered by. That's unbelievable. That is an individual's commitment to be a Jew under all circumstances. That is what Hashem wanted the Jewish people to understand when they received the Torah. And that is what Hashem wants us to remember. That our commitment to Torah means a commitment to serve Hashem, to be loyal to his Torah under all circumstances, whether it be as individuals in our own personal lives, whether it be as a community, whether it be for a short, it could be for a short act of self-sacrifice, or it could be self-sacrifice over a lengthy period of time. Whatever it may be, whatever the circumstances, our commitment has to be steadfast under all circumstances. There is an interesting question that I've seen asked, and that is that we are always praying for Mashiach. We're always praying for the Messiah to come. And the question begs to be asked, there were people more righteous and greater than us for years and years and years that were praying for Mashiach to come, and their prayers weren't answered. Who are we to think that our prayers will be answered? And the answer is because we may be quite smaller than previous generations. It's part of a tradition of the Talmud that the further on generations get, spiritually smaller they get. But that's also, at the same time that that's happening, it becomes harder for the later generations to serve Hashem. They may be getting smaller, but at the same time, they're also living under difficult circumstances that previous generations didn't necessarily experience. Getting smaller means personally they may not be as spiritually great as their grandfathers and great-grandfathers and ancestors. But we also know that the further we get away from the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, the further away from that experience when God revealed himself to all of us, the harder it gets to serve Hashem. And therefore, we may be smaller, we may not be able to accomplish as much as our predecessors did, but we're doing all that under more difficult circumstances. We're doing whatever we're doing with less spiritual potential, less spiritual capabilities, and we're doing it under more difficult circumstances. And when that happens, whatever we do is very special to Hashem, because of the fact that whatever we're doing it under much more difficult circumstances. We're remaining committed. Whatever the little bit that we do, compared to what previous generations did, it's so precious in Hashem's eyes that in our difficult situation, we're doing this much, getting this much done under those circumstances, is in some ways even greater. Is something that the previous generations didn't go through and didn't accomplish. We accomplished that. And therefore, we have something up on them. And therefore, it's possible that our prayers, specifically our prayers, will be the ones that will bring Mashiach. Because whatever we're accomplishing and doing the best to accomplish, we're doing it under difficult circumstances, more difficult than our predecessors. And therefore, we have that special merit. And may that special merit bring us to the point that we will see Mashiach Tzidkenu, the coming of Mashiach, the Meher Yameinu, speedily in our days. Wish you a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful Chag Shavuos. All the best.